And welcome back. We are going to continue to work with our game. We are now at the point where we want to actually start adding a little features and functionality. For example, we want to look at what is going to be a condition for winning and a condition for losing. Well, a good condition for winning would be probably like, hey, we get to the end of our level here, and we're like, oh, great, we got to it. Now what do we do? Well, we could simply, for our game, because it's simple, we could just restart the level. Much more complex game, we could do something like go to the next level or have some kind of bonus round or something like that. But for now, we're just going to look at this through the lens of like, we just want to complete this level. And for our testing purposes, because I don't want to necessarily traverse that whole level, I'm simply just going to have them get to the end here and say this is a good spot to effectively do our restart, our testing purpose. And we can always move that later on when we want to actually set that up. So that is going to be a good win condition. What about a lose condition? Well, lose condition might be something when I say, hey, our player, he's here and he falls on top of his head and he's got some head trauma. So we don't want that to happen because that's going to be a bad time. So what do we need to do to get this set up? Well, in order for us to add these new features and functionality, so let's go ahead and in our scripts folder here, let's go ahead and create two scripts. So I'm going to go ahead and create a C# script. And I'm going to go ahead and call this first one maybe crash detector or just crash or whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to keep it as crash detector because I think that's a good way just to help keep in mind of what this script is actually doing. And then we want one for our finish line. So, or maybe our restart line, whatever you want to call it, or end of level. Either one of those would be fine. And so let's just call this one finish. Now let's do finish line. Perfect. And now that these two scripts are created, we can go ahead and use them here within our game. But we probably also want to add in some kind of visual element. All right. So when we get to our finish line here, what do we want to do to give the player some indication that, hey, you've reached the end? Because it's nice to also have some kind of visual element for. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to scoot the game window over here just a little bit so I got a little more room to look at. In my hierarchy, let's go ahead and choose to create empty here, and let's just go ahead and call this our finish line. And we want to then create inside of this a 2D object. Let's go ahead and do a sprite. Let's just do a square here, and we'll call this just like a post. And maybe we want to have that post have a little bit more to it, maybe have like some kind of cap. So let's go ahead and create a 2D object. I'm going to go ahead and do another sprite. Let's do this time a circle, and we'll just call this the top for the top of the post. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to zoom in here a little bit, go to my rect tool, and let's just go ahead and stretch this guy out so he gets nice and tall and thin. And that looks pretty good there. And then what I want to do is go to the top here, and I want to move this guy in place so he kind of sits right on the top of this. All right, and maybe we want to take this other post and kind of stretch it on, because we want to make it so that he's, in respect to the player, it couldn't be big enough that we can have him kind of be a nice, good visual indicator. I'm going to scooch him over just a little bit more. Try to get that kind of nice and center there. It doesn't have to be perfect, but there we go. Now, these, of course, are white, which kind of blends in with the background here a little bit. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm actually going to choose a color for this. And I can pick any color that I want here to kind of make this happen. You can choose a different color if you want. You can go more of a blue, more pink, whatever color you want. We already do have some color schemes in here, though. So we have greens, we have reds, we have blues. So we probably want something that can complement in those color palettes here. But for our purpose, let's just go ahead and choose something maybe, let's do like a yellow here. I'm going to spin that back just a little bit, maybe a little bit between the green and the yellow. A little more green, perfect. And what I'm going to do before I go ahead and click on the other one is I'm going to go ahead and copy this hex code that's down here so I can make this post top the same color as the post itself. So once you find the color that you like, just go ahead and choose that and then just copy that code. And then we're going to go back to our post. We click on the color there. We can go to the hexadecimal, paste that in. And you'll see they are now the exact same color. Awesome. When I click off, you'll see they almost look like one kind of independent object here. And the next thing we want to do, because we want to have some sort of way for the game to detect that these are the collision with the player, is we want to add a collider to this. And notice I'm on the finish line here, not on the post at top, because I wanted to treat this all as one object. So let's just go ahead and start typing collider, and we can do a box collider 2D. And let's edit that collider. And I'm just going to go ahead and skinny this up here just so it's over top this post. And we're actually going to make this kind of go a lot bigger than the post itself. Simply because if I make it the exact height of this post, what happens if the player soars over top of this post? Even though they technically have crossed the finish line area, if they don't actually collide with this, there's going to be no way for us to know that they actually did. So I'm just going to go ahead and take that all the way up as much as I can there. That looks pretty good. Just because, again, if the player goes really high for some reason, I want them to be able to trigger this kind of end of level. And I'm going to actually grab this object. I'm going to move it then to where I want it to be. So I want this to be kind of here right at the end. So that's where it's going to be. So it's going to be a little off camera, but it's going to be right here at the end. That's where I'm going to do that. Now, also, I'm going to make this into a trigger, because if I keep it as a collider, the player's just going to bump into it and never going to go past it. Instead, we want it to trigger. We want it to cause something else to happen. So we're just going to go ahead and check it. Now, one more thing we can do before we actually go into code, we can actually go ahead and take this finish line script that we've created and drag it onto finish line right here. So I'm just going to go click and drag, bring that in, add that component, boom. Now we have finish line. Now we can go ahead and pop over into here and actually start. So in our code, let's go ahead and just remove the update and start methods because we don't need those right now. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. And what we want to do is if you remember, we've used this little snippet before. We want our on trigger enter 2D. So I can just go ahead and grab that, double click, perfect. And what we want to do for now, just to test to make sure this is working, is we're going to do a debug.log. And let's just go ahead and have it say a simple message like you finished. Or you can say you beat the level. However you want to phrase that, you can just go ahead and have a simple log statement there. All right, that looks good. Let's go ahead. And you see my player came through. He's ran into it, and we can see we got a message that says you finished. So again, I'm going to run that from the top. Let's go ahead and clear this out. If I press run here, here's my player. He's going. I'm just going to let him run. Boop, he hits it, and you finished. Awesome. So we're good there. Now, notice our game did not restart because we haven't added that functionality, but we know we are triggered. Now, the only thing that we might encounter is if we had other things going on in this world, like different environment pieces or anything like that. We don't want this to trigger from those pieces. We only want this to trigger when the player does that. And we've actually handled some of this before in our previous game. So we're going to actually go to our player here, and we're actually going to do a tag. So let's go ahead and create a tag here. And I'm just going to go ahead and make a new tag, and let's just call this one player, something nice, easy, and simple for us to remember. Click save. And now that I have that player tag, if I go back to player, all right, we do see an option here now for the player tag. So we can add that in there. Boom, there's a player. Boom, he's ready to go. And let's go ahead then and add that as a tag option. Now, if you recall, how do we do this? How do we set it up so we are only using our tag here? Well, we need to use a if statement here. So we have to say if, and we have to identify what we want to have that collide with. So in here we have collision, all right, which is the name of that object here. But we could easily just rename this, for example, to an other object. Remember, it doesn't matter what this is called because this is simply just another object here. So if you say like other dot, and of course we have our tag, and we could just see if that is equal to, we want it to be the player tag because we want to see if it is indeed the player. And don't forget your curly brackets here. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my debug.log. I'm going to move that up into here. Looks great. And let's just tab that over so we know that that is part of our if statement. And that should be all we need. Let's go ahead and test that out, though. So I'll go ahead and run our game. Now, it should functionally still be the same because we should see, boop, there it is, still working. All right, great. We didn't break anything. That's always good. Whenever you make changes to test out your game, make sure that those changes. Now, if you remember, there was two things that we set out to do here. We wanted to set out a option for us to restart a level, which we've set up the structure for that. We haven't fully implemented it, but we set up the structure for it. And we also wanted to restart our game if we had our player, for example, bump his head. So we need to handle that. So since we are looking at the player doing that, we probably actually want to look at this from the perspective of the player doing script. Now, we already created a crash detector script, which we haven't done anything with, but let's go ahead and go to our player object and add that crash detector script to it. And I'm just going to collapse some of these other things here so they're out of the way. And that means that the player is going to be the one responsible for the crash detection. We could, of course, set to other things, but since we are controlling the player, we want that detection to happen through the crash detector. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to use a tag again, just like we saw last time. And even though we have a flag here for player, we also probably want a tag here for our level here. So we want to have some kind of tag that's going to indicate that this is our level here. So let's go up to a tag, and let's go ahead and add another tag, and we'll hit add. And we can call this something simple as the ground. All right, it doesn't have to be too complex. I hit save. And now when I go back to the level sprite, we can tag that here as the ground. Awesome. So now we, of course, have that set up. We can go ahead and head back into our scripts. Let's go ahead and open up Crash Detector now and get ready to do some code there. So similar as we saw before, we're probably going to use this almost identical to how we did the on trigger enter 2D here. All right, so actually I'm just going to make my level simple. I'm going to copy this from finish line, go to Crash Detector. Let's remove our start and void methods, paste that in, and then I want you to think, how can we change this to work for the ground now? Because it's probably still going to be on trigger enter 2D, but how are we going to change this so that way this is going to be something? All right, so if you thought about it, you probably have recognized that here we had the player tag. But if you remember, we created a new tag for this one, which was the ground tag. And let's go ahead and change our debug message to be something appropriate for here, such as you hit your head. All right, and of course you could make something else. You could have say ouch, you could say head trauma, whatever you want it to be. You can set that up because again, this is just your log statement, so that way you know. And so I'm going to go ahead and test out here in my game. I'm going to bring the game window over just a little bit so we can see a little more. Let's go ahead and press play just to make sure this works. And I'm going to go ahead and try to rotate this guy so he can hit his head when he falls. Boop. And let's see if we look at our console, we can see you hit your head. All right, awesome. So that is working here. And of course, he's still kind of hitting his head because he's still moving. But we are now have the structure kind of set up for our game and for us to be able to do